and welcome to Answers News for Thursday, July the 18th. Oh, I was doing so well there. Me and dates just, so we're still in July, not August. I'm here with Dr. Georgia Purdom and Ken Ham. Good to have you back, Ken. I haven't done an episode with you in a little while.
I've been trying to avoid it, but are you going to welcome our studio audience?
Yes, we have a wonderful live studio audience. You guys want to clap and say hi?
And we're also being live streamed, I believe, down to the Answer Center. No, we're not today.
That's on Mondays.
Oh, that's on Mondays. I can't keep up with all this.
Just so people know, and we want to make sure people understand what's happening here, we usually do this on Mondays and Thursdays live, but we're actually going to be doing this on Mondays only from 2 to 2:30, Answers News. I mean, it is very popular.
In August, starting in August.
Starting
in August, we're going to do it just one day a week because a number of our speakers are traveling a lot. It's harder to get all the people to do it. But not only that, now we have the Answers Center open and we have speakers down there as well as here. And the other thing is we have the ability to be able to live stream actual presentations from the Creation Museum and the Ark. So every Thursday now we're going to be live streaming whoever speaks here. So even those of you who are visiting, when you are home on Thursdays, you'll be able to see at 12 o'clock, actually, 12 o'clock, the speaker here in the Creation Museum. We're going to be live streaming that, and we'll be live streaming some of the presentations from the Ark Encounter as well, and then every Monday we'll do Answers News from 2 to 2:30. So we're sort of increasing the amount of live streaming we're doing. We thought that was the best way to do it all. And also, just as we start off with, I wanted to bring to your attention a special deal we have with PureFlix. Have you heard of PureFlix? It's the faith, family-friendly alternative to Netflix. But we now have all of our videos. We have a great relationship with PureFlix, and all of our videos are on PureFlix. So there's about 500 Answers and Genesis videos. So if you subscribe to PureFlix, for less than the cost of one DVD a month, you get access to the hundreds of Answers and Genesis videos. And eventually our live streaming will be on there too when they get that technology up and running. But we have a deal for you. We have a magazine called Answers. Now, Answers won 11 awards this year, and it won the top award for a Christian magazine from the Evangelical Press Association. And this is the latest issue. Actually, the latest issue, look at this. We have
it was cool.
A poster. Look at that, dinosaur poster. And it's a Christian worldview, creation apologetics magazine, so it's unique in the world. And not only that, there is a small kids magazine in every issue as well. You can see that there. And we have a digital magazine that goes with it, so everything digitally that can be searched, and we have lots of extra things on the digital magazine. Now, when you subscribe to the magazine, you can subscribe for a year, you will get the digital magazine. But if you actually subscribe to PureFlix for 12 months, then you actually get the print magazine free and the digital magazine, and we give you some other downloads free as well. And so that's a really good deal. And then you get all the Answers and Genesis videos, but you have to go to that particular website there, that particular link, answersmagazine.com/PureFlix. And that is one way of getting the magazine. So
I'm getting a lot of people on here from all over the world on YouTube. I've got the Channel Islands, I've got Myanmar, I've got Slovakia, and lots of states in the U.S. as well.
Nice.
So, cool. Sweden, too.
I'm going to be following along the comments on my Facebook, public Facebook, and there we are. I see a lot of people online. And so, yeah, we got a lot of comments already. Someone from Ohio, that's a long way away. Australia.
Wyoming, Wisconsin.
Someone watching from Williamstown,
Ohio.
Kentucky, less than 2 miles from the Ark Encounter, they say. Someone from California, that's a different country. And Arizona, and okay, so the comments coming in. All right, over to you, Avery.
All right, so we have our first just kind of fun article before we get into the actual news. Tyrannosaurus Rex costume race at Washington State racetrack goes viral. So this is the third annual Tyrannosaurus Rex race.
That's hard to say.
I watched this so many times and just kept laughing because that's like the funniest thing you'll ever see. So as you can see, people race in T-Rex costumes at a horse racing track in Washington State.
You know, I think that's actually the first time I've seen a live transitional form. There's evidence for evolution right there.
That's pretty funny.
So,
We
yeah.
always like to have some fun things.
Follow us back to a building crew.
Oh, that's, hey.
Wait, look, we've got our own.
I wonder what was going on. I thought my computer's going crazy. Okay.
We totally surprised him
We
on
didn't
that
tell
one.
him that was
I
going to
didn't know.
happen.
I didn't know it was happening.
Yeah. And he has, and our T-Rex back there has an incredible race T-shirt on, okay? Because this year our VBS is the incredible race, and it's talking all about different people groups and how we get those different people groups and issues of race and racism. So it's a great, great VBS if you haven't decided on that yet for this year and you want to do
And
it.
that T-Rex looks so real.
I know.
Yeah.
Little T-Rex.
I was
on.
The
really-
look on your face was
That was really-
fantastic. You look
That's
so
classic.
confused.
We'll have to replay that several times. So. It's
All right.
almost as good as the race.
On to the news.
Oh, that was great. All right. So, after that good laugh. All right. This is from the CBC. Ottawa, so this is from Canada. Ottawa looking at criminal code reforms to deter shameful conversion therapy. So the federal government is basically calling on different provincial governments to stop what they refer to as conversion therapy because they consider it to be a shameful, abusive practice, and they want to see an end put to it, which, Georgia, you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, conversion therapy is often, and this is to help people supposedly convert from being homosexual to heterosexual. And there have been abuses of conversion therapy. There've been cases where people have been basically bullied and a very unbiblical methods used to try to help convert people. And we definitely don't condone those. But the problem with this is it's not just talking about that. It's talking about pretty much anything that might be used to help a person understand their sin, repent of that sin, and change.
So if we were to sit down with someone and say, look what the Bible says, God made male and female, Genesis 1:27, and marriage is one man and one woman because God made man from dust, woman from his side, and Jesus in the New Testament, Matthew 19, said you become one because you're one flesh, and God made them male and female, and that person realized, I'm wrong to think that gay marriage is correct and that homosexual behavior is okay, and then you read Romans 1 and they say, I need to repent of my sin, then according to what the government of Canada wanted to do, that would be considered criminal to do that.
Yeah,
So
it's defined so vaguely in here.
And so it can be used against Christians. It could be used against the Bible. When are they going to start outlawing the Bible in Canada?
Well, and they even say that activists say conversion therapy often happens informally in churches. So even if you were talking to someone about this informally, not a formal counseling session, nothing, you could be brought up on charges for conversion
If
therapy.
this goes through,
It's the anti-Christian worldview that is permeating our culture, and that's what we've always said. We've always said that, you know, in regard to the LGBTQ movement, people say, well, all they want is to be freedom to have their views. No, they want total acceptance. They want to force it on everyone else, and they want to eliminate anyone who says this is what's right and that's what's wrong based on the Bible. That's really what it's all about.
No care for free speech.
And so
or
it's not
freedom
just
of
to do
religion.
with allowing a particular view, it's to do with forcing their view on everyone. And it's interesting here how there's a statement, the government said in March, conversion therapies are immoral. Well, who decides what's moral and what's not? On what basis do they decide morality? If there's no absolute authority, then that's their opinion. And what they're really saying is what the Bible says about marriage and that gender, that it's male and female, is immoral. That's what they're really saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's where our world's going. That's what's coming in America, by the way. It's already here to a degree, but it's coming more
We're
and
just
more.
a few years behind, is my opinion and what I usually see. With the UK and with Canada, they're just a few years ahead of us
Yeah, it
in
seems to
wanting
be
to
the
limit
case.
our freedoms and what we can say and do.
Yeah. The next article also comes from Canada. It's from LifeSite News. Nova Scotia caves to transgender demands. Will fund breast implants for men. So an individual in Nova Scotia who is a biological male who identifies as a female was denied having breast implants in 2017 on the grounds the surgery was not medically necessary. So he got upset because women who identify as men are allowed to have the government pay for mastectomies, things like that. So he got really upset about it, and predictably the government caved and was like, oh, okay, well, we'll pay for your surgery then. So now taxpayer money is going to pay for this surgery as well.
To be consistent, They have to. I mean, I don't agree with it at all. I don't think any of taxpayer money should be used for something like this. But they're saying it's medically necessary. And I'm like, then we need to, then they've totally redefined what is medically necessary.
He says,
this is cosmetic.
I mean, this article says, it is apparently a government responsibility to ensure that men identifying as women are able to alter their appearances in such a way that the general public does not immediately notice that they are in fact biological men.
He claims, he's like, I know I am a woman, but this is challenged daily when others react to me and how I look, because you're not a woman. The reason you don't look like a woman is because you're not a woman. You are a biological male.
This is such foolishness. And it's absurd. But it's what happens when you abandon God's word. Anything goes. And you know, it's why I often use that verse of scripture in Judges 21:25. When there's no king, no absolute authority to tell them what to do, they all do what is right in their own eyes. That's what's happening to our own culture. We have generations that no longer build their thinking on God's word. So therefore, ultimately, anything goes. And you know, if you want to know where America is heading, where Canada is heading, the West is heading, go and read all the perversions in these cultures, like the Canaanites and others. In fact, go to the Old Testament and read many of those sins that of some of those cultures that are talked about in the Old Testament. And there's a whole list of them. You'll read about homosexual behavior and bestiality and pedophilia, and it goes on and on. That's where the culture is heading, because once you have no absolute authority, anything goes.
And I think too, you know, there are actually some people who say not just they identify as the opposite sex, but now they identify as someone who is missing a limb. And so they want their limbs removed. They want their arm removed or their legs removed. And I'm not joking about this. I mean, or they want to be blind, or they want to be deaf, or they want to be. And so are they going to pay for that too? Because I guess it's like whatever you identify with. Somebody said on here, are they going to pay for liposuction? I mean, I want to identify as thin. So, you know. I mean,
like where does it stop?
Where does it stop? I mean, it just it becomes absurd. It really does.
It says that this, of course, is predictable, since there's scarcely a politician in all of Canada who dares to question the brand new orthodoxies of gender fluidity in the general response to transgender demands, is caving and delivering whatever apologies or affirmations end up being demanded. You know what? Politicians are really weak. Most politicians, the majority, you know, if you talk to them personally, I'll guarantee they have different beliefs than what they think, you know, what people think they believe in regard to these sorts of issues. But people just don't have what would you call it? A boldness to be able to stand up and say what they believe.
And that's the problem. And we need to do that, because if we don't stand and say something, it disappears. I mean, it's going to go away. If they think no one's going to object to it, that's what's going to happen.
People just aren't game to stand up for what they believe. Because as soon as you stand up and say, well, gay marriage is wrong, or something like that, or abortion is wrong, you're a misogynist, you are homophobic, you are racist. Of course, everybody's a racist. They accuse everyone of racism these days, right?
You hate everyone. I mean, because of that, you hate them, because you disagree with them.
Because three of us are here who believe the Bible. We're racist, obviously. I mean, that's the way it is in politics these days. It's just getting ridiculous. But and because, you know, it's interesting, they say at the end here in this article, and this really sums it up, I think. They say that people can believe whatever they want, but these activists want far more than that. They want us to accept it, they want us to voice our support, and they want us to foot the bill. And that's the bottom line.
Somebody on here said they are a former atheist, and they're now studying apologetics, and they love Answers in Genesis.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's so cool to hear like stories like that of people that, you know, have come out of that and love learning the truth. So.
Somebody said here, I identify as a millionaire, but the bank disagreed. Imagine that.
I like that. Well, somebody on here said I identify as 25 years younger. So they're going to pay for the surgery to make me look 25 years younger? I mean, you know.
Well, I
take it to its logical conclusion.
have to identify as 25 years younger. I already look that way.
Definitely.
Yeah, anyways, moving on.
I looked at a photo the other day of me and when I was a teenager, thought, I haven't changed much. You know, I dye my hair now so people know I'm getting older. I mean, I have to do that.
You wish. Oh, my gosh. Okay.
Next one comes from New Scientist. David Attenborough on climate change. We cannot be radical enough.
Hey, let me just say before you summarize this.
Okay.
Many people probably have heard of David Attenborough, who narrated a nature
Everyone
program
knows
that
his
was
voice.
that was totally evolutionary and millions of years and so on. Some of the younger generation here mightn't have heard of him because he's in his 90s now.
He's 93 now.
You know,
I didn't know he was that old.
I grew up
Wow.
and the days of David Attenborough on TV have always used to frustrate me. I love the photography on those nature programs, but you would turn down the sound because it was always just his atheistic evolutionary worldview presented as fact.
Yeah.
So anyway, go on. Sorry to interrupt.
Long interlude.
That's all right. So he was speaking to the UK Parliamentary Committee recently, because he's from the UK, and he was talking about how the UK needs to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, and he says, we cannot be radical enough in dealing with these issues, and then pointed to the young people, and we're like, it's the young people who really need to be leading the charge on this, because this is their world that we're leaving for them, and we don't want to mess it up, and all this stuff you normally hear
They're
from
going to destroy
climate change
their world.
alarmists.
They don't realize what they're doing. They're going to destroy their world. And, you know, he says we need to have, in the United Kingdom, he's talking about, reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. So that means by 2050, you won't be driving cars.
Well, and the thing is, too, what you need to realize is they talk all about these carbon dioxide levels. You know, they want to talk about carbon dioxide. The thing is, people need to realize carbon dioxide is not a major greenhouse gas. Guess what the major greenhouse gas is? Water.
Water
That
vapor.
is the major greenhouse gas. And that is not being put out by cars or you know what I'm saying? It's this whole misunderstanding, and we're just listening to the media, not really knowing what the reality and what the truth is.
And we've only really recorded temperatures and other things in climate since about, what, 1880 or something like that.
Hasn't been very long,
accurately.
And here's what I don't get. You know, every time there's a hurricane or a storm or a flood, now climate change, everything's climate change, you know? There's climate change today because the temperature's higher than it was yesterday. So there's climate change in Kentucky today, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And we're going to get high temperatures. It's going to be 96, they said, the heat index. They got temperature warnings out. Can you imagine? You know, there'll be AOC and some of these other politicians saying, look what climate change has done. But actually, there's been higher temperatures in the past. It just so happens today it's going to be a particular temperature.
Climate's changed.
There's medieval warming period, little
what do they say
ice age in the Middle Ages.
when you look at the Sahara Desert, and everyone recognizes when you look under the Sahara Desert, there used to be rivers there.
Yep.
I mean, there was
Trees,
water.
plants,
Used to be
great.
trees and plants. But wait a minute, that was before industrialization.
Yeah, exactly. That's because climates change naturally. And some people have done a lot of studies thinking maybe it's related to the cycles of the sun. You know, there are times when there's more sunspots, less sunspots. That has to do with the output of the sun. And that does affect our temperatures here on Earth. There's been the little ice age, you know, that occurred back in the 1800s. There was one then. So it's just there are natural fluctuations and changes, but yet they want to make all these changes that are going to hurt people, especially poor people in the long run.
Yeah.
And it will. Can you explain why it's going to hurt poor people? Because we've
Well,
had,
yeah, because it's going to cut. They're going to say you can't do all of these things that you do. And so what's going to happen is they're not going to have the help that they need because they're depending a lot of times on the Western countries to help them out.
And help industrialize their nation and
Right.
things, yeah.
And so then that goes away.
Yeah.
And so they're left with nothing. And the thing is, we need to understand increased CO2 actually helps plants. It helps them grow better.
Yeah,
And so it
produce more
could
food.
help that. So
Open up
we're
new
hurting.
areas to grow food.
well, there are
that you
places in
can't
the
right
Arctic
now.
where they used to farm.
Like Greenland, yeah.
Yeah, Greenland,
Yeah.
but then it's all frozen. So wait a minute. So they think it might revert back to having farmland, and that's a bad thing?
Yeah, I know. That's
And
the
see,
problem with it.
if you don't believe the flood, you won't understand climate
Right,
change.
yeah, that's the
because
crux
of the
the
global
issue.
flood, it generated an ice age after the flood because you had warm waters, cool land, ash in the atmosphere. And if you go, for instance, go to Jackson, Wyoming. It's one of my favorite towns in America. I love Jackson right there at the Tetons and the Yellowstone National Park. But you'll see all these massive valleys where glaciers once carved out those valleys. Well, wait a minute, climate change must have melted those glaciers back. And that, and they would say that was way before industrialization,
Right.
Obviously, because of the
Right, yeah,
dates the
because of the
evolutionists put on
dates,
it.
yeah.
But wait a minute, so all these climates have changed in the past, and the whole thing is out of hand. It's ridiculous.
It is. It is. Especially when you say radical change and we can't be radical enough. I mean, it's just going to hurt people.
A
in the
good
end.
resource to go to learn more about that is the Cornwall Alliance for the Stewardship of Creation. Cornwallalliance.org, I think, is their website. That's a great resource to learn more about.
Yeah. If you didn't understand
Christian
the
worldview.
Canadian accent and you want
Cornwall
it in
Alliance.
English, cornwallalliance.org. Yeah.
So speaking of
Can you say
climate
it in
change-
American?
I can understand what she said. It's your Australian ears that are the problem. So.
All right, speaking of climate change, this next item comes from Science Daily. Coral reefs shifting away from equator. So corals have been, a lot of the discussion about climate change has revolved around corals because the coral reefs, particularly the Great Barrier Reef from Australia, one of the most famous ones, people are very concerned that as temperatures rise or the ocean acidifies, the corals are going to die out. And it's going to ruin all these really important ecosystems. Well, what they're finding from this study over the last 4 decades is that, yes, coral reefs in tropical areas are declining, but the corals are migrating to subtropical climates where it's now they're able to live, and they're adapting to that environment, and they're starting to grow reefs there, and they're starting to get a whole new ecosystem. It's not the same as the tropical ecosystems, but they're creating a whole new ecosystem where there wasn't one before, which is really interesting.
I want to ask a question. Georgia's a geneticist, and she's done a lot of research and read research papers, right? So this was done in a particular place in the world, okay? It wasn't done in Australia, and we have the Great Barrier Reef there. But when I read this is one particular paper, one particular scientific paper, and here's what they say. The trends we identified in this analysis are exceptionally difficult to detect. So is it possible, I mean, this is all about climate change. It's all to do with, look what climate change has done, and the reefs are going to die out, and they're migrating to other areas and all the rest of it. But then they say the analysis is exceptionally difficult to detect. So is it possible it's just, a particular interpretation of some limited data, or?
And one of the things they do say, they say, well, this is just, like he said, for one area. So we need to look at this in other areas. We need to look at this over the long term. We need to see what's really happening. So basically, again, they're trying to make a big deal about it, because the more big deal you make about it, the more money you get to study it. And so, if you can hook it on to climate change, especially, you're going to get money to do it. So, and I do agree, we need to study it, and we need to figure this out, and we need to take care of our environment and take care of our planet, because we're stewards of it. God has given it to us. But at the same time, I think we did an article the other week on squid and how they are adapting to, so to speak, climate change. And the thing is what it shows is that God has made animals extremely resilient and extremely robust, and be able to adapt and live in the environments that we have, and even with the changes that we have. So,
well, ever since the flood, there's been all sorts of changes. Even the last few hundred years, we've seen places where, like in England, I went to the place where what was the name of that ship that came over here? The founding fathers.
The Plymouth?
Mayflower.
Mayflower.
Yeah. So I'm Australian. How do I remember?
Wow.
So anyway.
She's younger. Give me a break.
You're Canadian. No wonder.
I'm Canadian, so.
But where the Mayflower started off, and you realise it used to be in here, but that's all land now. So the oceans have all changed, and a lot of rivers have changed, and other things have changed, and ocean currents are changing. All sorts of things change. And so is it that this is because of man-produced climate change, or is this something that's just been happening since the flood? Actually, there's been climate change ever since the flood, and there's going to be climate change. But here's the thing to remember. In Genesis chapter 8, what did God say to Noah? He said, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, day and night will not cease. And so, and winter and summer and so on are not going to cease. So there's going to be seasons, and that's not going to change. Seed time, harvest, that's not going to change. So that doesn't mean we just abuse the environment, but it also means God's in charge of it, not man. So I got news for everyone. The earth is not going to be destroyed in 12 years, as one politician said recently.
Somebody on here said, I'm just thankful for modern climate control in my house. Especially right now, I'm thankful for that too, that I can control the climate in some places. So.
This one also comes from Science Daily. Oldest completely preserved lily discovered. So this was a fossil found in Brazil, supposedly 115 million years old, of a lily. And surprisingly, it looks just like a lily and has all the features of lilies and all the features of the class monocots that lilies belong to.
It actually says, it shows almost all the typical characteristics of these plants, the monocots, including parallel vein, narrow leaves, leaf sheath, fibrous root system, And it goes
Triple
on,
flowers.
and then it looks at other fossils that are there, and it says the tropical flowering plants, they already were diverse, they're unusually diverse. Do you know what it's saying? Wow, these plants have always been plants, and they've always been the same plants that we recognise today, and the lilies have always been lilies, and they forgot to evolve.
Yeah,
Looks like it.
It's a little bit shocking for them to find this at this level in the fossil record, because before this, they had found pollen from monocots that go back about 125 million years, but they had never found a fully fossilized monocot. I think the most recent was like 90 million years ago, so this is pushing it back to 115. And so again, the story changes. I mean, we usually do an article on this at least once a week, where
Yeah,
the evolutionary story has to change all over again.
Yeah.
Like, oh, monocots now, oh, they keep pushing it back, because the fact is that God created all of these, at least their original kinds, on days 5 and 6, 3, 5, and 6 of creation, and they flourished and did fine until the time of the flood. And so it's not surprising that we find them.
And this lily was amazingly preserved. The roots, the flowers, even the individual cells were fossilized, which points to catastrophic burial, not slow, gradual processes like we observe.
Hey, somebody here said they're on a bus heading to the Ark Encounter.
Oh,
There we are.
that's fun.
I'll probably be at the Ark Encounter tomorrow. Yeah, the interesting thing is, over and over again, you read these articles when they find fossils. Wow, they're extremely well preserved. Wow, the state of preservation is so phenomenal. See, because even think of them, millions of fish fossils that there are in the fossil record. You know, when I went to school, I was taught a fish dies, sink to the bottom. Actually, some fish actually float when they die, and then slowly covered by sediment over millions of years, and it's beautifully preserved. Yeah, fish don't rot when they die, they don't fall apart. No, they just sit there
Nothing
waiting
eats them.
for millions of years
Yeah.
until they're covered. Actually, you know the best way to form a fish fossil or plant fossils, like many we have in the fossil record, or like these lily fossils, if you've got an aquarium and you've got fish in there and you've got some lilies in there, and you hire a cement truck, and while the fish is washing, you pour in the cement, and that's how you preserve those fossils. Like
That's right.
in other words, it's got to be catastrophic.
All right, I think we got time for a couple more here. New York Times, Vincent Lambert, Frenchman at center of right to die case, dies at 42. So this has been kind of in and out of the news for a long time now. This individual who has had severe brain damage after being in an accident back in 2008 has finally passed away. There's been this big legal battle going on with some members of his family just wanting doctors to stop giving him any kind of care and allow him to pass away. Other members of his family saying, no, that is basically killing a disabled person because he's in a vegetative state, still able to survive with food and water. And
So we have a number of young people in the audience, and also a lot of people watching us. So this brings up the topic of euthanasia. And Georgia, it would be good for you to give us, from your perspective, okay, so how should Christians view this? And in regard to this issue, and what about people who are suffering,
Right.
and so how do we deal with that?
And I'm sure it's hard to see someone like this suffer, especially for such a long period of time. But one of the things, and my understanding of this case and what they did, was that this person was not on any kind of life support systems. The part of the brain that controls the beating of the heart and the breathing and all was still functional and still working. So they weren't on any kind of life support system. What they did was they removed food and water. Okay, so they stopped giving him those things, and he died, of course.
Dehydration or
But that is actively killing someone. This person did not pass away; they were murdered by the doctors because they withdrew food and water. It is absolutely wrong to withdraw things that are basic necessities for life. You need food, you need water, and you need oxygen to survive. And so if the person can survive as long as those things are given, then they should still be given. I mean, yes, this person is severely disabled, but that doesn't give us the right to just kill them because I guarantee the reason they want to do this is because it's costing a lot of money and it's costing people a lot of time, and people don't want to deal with that. And so it's just easier to have the person die and relieve them of that. And so
Because we've got to remember that all humans are made in the image of God,
Yep.
and it's God who determines when you are born and when you die. And actually, right from the point of fertilization, you're
Right.
human.
Yep.
But then again, if you kill babies in the womb,
why not?
why not kill people who are elderly or people who are diseased? Or, I mean, we're all
Yeah.
just animals anyway, right? So
Right.
Yeah,
get rid of a
sure,
spare
yeah.
animal, get rid of someone you don't want. Actually, it's one of the things that you see even in America in regard to some of the issues in the past in politicians bringing in particular health programs, and that it was really, they really recognize that the older you get, you start to have health problems because your body starts to fall apart. And so you need help, and they recognize a lot of money goes towards helping those people with medical issues, so they want to get rid of people earlier. So have they thought about that in regard to themselves, by the way?
Yeah. Well, and it's really sad, because the thing is, it's one thing to say you're not going to give life-saving medication, or you're not going to resuscitate someone if they, if that happens, but it's another thing to remove actual necessities for life from someone, and so that's
And I think that's a good. I think that's a good sort of rule of thumb to go by for us to understand it. The difference between actively killing someone
and passively and allowing them to die by natural means.
Someone
basically.
like that.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting comment.
Big difference.
Watching from near the North Pole in Alaska, we had a really weird winter, barely any snow, but still really cold, and lo and behold, spring and summer still came, and the plants and animals seemed just fine.
That's cool.
You know why they
Wow.
why they had barely any snow? Because all the moisture was down here above Kentucky, coming down for 3 months. I think we had inches and inches and inches of rain.
Oh my word, we had so much
In fact,
rain.
even some of the news media were talking about, I'm glad we have the ark in the area because there's so much rain. So they thought that was a great joke.
Come visit.
Yep. All right, I think we got time for one more.
This one comes from LifeSite News. California mandates LGBT sensitivity for teachers even when they disagree. So this was a new bill that was just approved by the State Assembly of California, that every junior high and high school teacher must undergo training on how to support kids who identify as LGBTQ, such as referring students to activist organizations that will help them live their new identity, encouraging, children to transition, and keeping secrets from parents, not telling parents if a child identifies as LGBT at school or wants to have different pronouns or things like that. So that's what these teachers are going to be trained in, regardless of whether or not they agree with the ideology.
Well, think about what's going on. They say here, one school teacher from a school district just north of San Diego described how the LGBT training she received last January ridiculed her Christian upbringing, forced teachers to raise their hands to expose their beliefs on gender in order to shame them, and teachers who admitted their parents had a binary biblical view of gender were told how wrong and backward those views were. And so this is being forced on teachers. And it says here, teachers received instructions on keeping secrets from parents, as you mentioned. It was shared with us that when a child tells us they are transgender, gay, or want to be the opposite sex, they're not allowed to share it with the parents, but they have to use the preferred pronoun of the student. So what happens when the student is there with the parents and the teacher talks to the student? They call him a Z, but in front of the parents, they call him a he.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole thing is, it's evil. It's just downright evil.
It's outright bullying of teachers. I mean, they talk about the teachers, they need to be sensitive to students. Well, what about being sensitive to the teachers and their beliefs, right? It's not tolerance. It's intolerance is what it is. And it's tolerance of everything but Christians and their beliefs. And so it's really sad, but that's what we're seeing. And I thought what was interesting to me was that, too, this was passed unanimously. Okay? And the reason it passed unanimously is because virtually every Republican refused to vote. And I was like, even if they didn't have a chance to win, even if they, because of the way it split up, they still should have said, no, this is wrong. And I thought when I read that, I thought of the quote from Edmund Burke, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And that's
I suspect the reason they didn't vote is because they recognize if they vote against this, they're not going to get people voting for them because, they're going to see them as LGBTQ, that they're against them, and they don't want to be called homophobic and all the rest of it. That's what's wrong with our politicians. They're not prepared to stand up for what's right and what they should do. And it says here that that if you know someone who lives in California, you can read it in the article, make sure they take time to contact their state senators, and there's contact information there for the specific members of the Senate Education Committee. But once this becomes law in California, then all public school teachers are going to be forced to have this particular so-called sensitivity training. It's nothing more than forcing the LGBT worldview upon them. And just as we finish too, Avery, you mentioned before when you look at what's happening with the number of kids who are supposedly transitioning from one gender to the other, how much has it gone up?
I read in an article recently that in the UK, the number of children who are being referred to gender clinics has gone up 4,000% in the last 8 years. 4,000%. So this is a problem that people are creating by talking to children as young as preschool and kindergarten and telling them they don't have to be the gender that they are. And people are creating this confusion.
It's really a shocking child abuse.
It's child abuse, exactly. That's exactly what it is, and it needs to stop. Parents need to be standing up and saying, enough, no, we're not putting up with this, because this is absolutely ridiculous.
Well, we've run out of time.
But we've run out of time.
Yeah.
So on that, hopefully you can join us again on Monday. We'll have some new articles to discuss then, and we look forward to seeing you then.